You're listening to Autumn on the Air, the weekly podcast that brings you conversations about the impact of research commercialization and the people who make it happen. Join us for interviews with patent and licensing professionals, innovators, entrepreneurs, and tech transfer leaders on the issues and trends that matter most. Keep listening for an inside track on the people, IP policies, and politics changing our world.
Welcome to Autumn on the Air. Today our guest is Joe Runge, a practicing patent lawyer, published scientist, and a 20-year veteran of the innovation economy. Joe holds the unique distinction of being the only student in history to simultaneously earn both a law degree and a master's degree in biology from the University of Iowa. Currently, he serves as the associate director and co-founder of the UNeTech Institute, a shared research institute between the University of Nebraska Omaha and the University of Nebraska Medical Center. Joe's impact extends far beyond the traditional boundaries of tech transfer. He's the principal investigator on the multiple economic development and entrepreneurship grants, helping secure over $5 million in competitive funding. He's also a multi-campus professor, published scientist, and TEDx speaker. More recently, Joe delivered a powerful TEDx talk entitled Innovation Needs Connection at TEDx Omaha 2024, where he shared deeply personal insights from his 2 decades of helping inventors, entrepreneurs, and innovators to navigate the challenging path from discovery to market. Welcome back to the podcast, Joe. So excited to have you here on the air.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It's a real pleasure to be back.
Yeah, and it's been a while since we last talked. I mean, the last time we talked, we did a podcast involving your podcast, Innovation Overground, with Tyler Scher and Charlie Linton. Loved that podcast. What happened to it?
So a big part of it was we did Innovation Overground while I was kind of transitioning in my role from going from full-time Unimed to starting the UNeTech Institute. And when I really started scaling up UNeTech, I had to be a lot more deliberate about my time. And so I think I was kind of the Yoko Ono of my own Beatles and, had to
broke up the group.
Devote the time and had to break up the group. Yeah. And Charlie and Tyler had a couple of ideas to keep it going that didn't quite come through. But if Unimed does put Innovation Overground back on the air, I will, jump up on the table and cheer and shout because it was a lot of fun. I think that someone needs to find the best university innovations out there, so I don't have to. And if anyone wanted to do that, I would be honored. Charlie and Tyler are now they've since moved facilities, so they're in kind of the new innovation district here in Omaha, Nebraska. And there's a lot of great facilities over there to be able to do recording and things like that. So it would be a lot of fun to see them pick it back up again.
Yeah, I hope somebody does. It was a great podcast. It was very informative, educational, and it was a lot of fun. You guys were hilarious. So fingers crossed that at some point you guys revisit that. I hope you do. But, don't have you on the podcast today to talk about Innovation Overground. But I do have you on to talk about your TEDx talk that you gave last November in Omaha. And you started that talk out with a really powerful statement. You said just one word can change everything. So I want to dive into that a little bit more. Tell us about that pivotal moment with the stent to balloon story and how it fundamentally changed your perspective on tech transfer.
So I think ultimately the person that kind of started that project, which was this really cool nanoformulation, really believed that there was a sane and rational process by which great ideas become products. And I think at the end of it, I didn't. Not that I believe it was irrational, but I believe it was a lot more random and happenstance and almost accidental, right? And the frustration, that I felt with that was that, here I am talking with somebody who knows more about the topic than I do. And because I didn't mention it was suitable for a specific application, I got no response. And in those days, I was spending a lot of time, cold emailing, which I'm sure a lot of the audience can relate to. And, you just get nothing, right? And you sort of wonder why, right? Like, why isn't anyone responding to this? And that was a unique campaign because it was just nothing. No one responded to anything. And I think it was ultimately the frustration I felt that I have to get every single word correct that really kind of informed, the emotional response there. And I give a lot of credit to TEDx Omaha. They really, my coach David Gillis really stuck with me and wanted me to not tell the story. He wanted me to use the story to convey the emotion of it. And so he really, pushed me to focus on that frustration and to tell the story around it. And, I had to memorize the talk, and I spent, weeks and weeks and weeks just listening to myself do the talk over and over, which was horrible. And when I finally got to the point to deliver it, there's a line around there that actually got a laugh from the audience, and you can tell in the video feed when they laugh, I'm like, what the heck, I was so committed to my own retelling of the story that I had genuinely forgotten that was a gag. And, it was really a nice little moment when I was delivering it, because it gave me a chance to kind of get out of a bit of the roteness that I think came about from that delivery. And it was a little terrifying in the moment, but it was most welcome in context.
Yeah, you can definitely tell by the look on your face. It was kind of like, oh yeah, that was supposed to be funny type of thing.
Right.
Yeah, it was hilarious.
It's funny too, because the room that we were in was lit down. And so the audience was just this black blur, and my eyes aren't great to start with. And so I couldn't see anyone in the audience. It was just this, almost amorphous laugh that kind of came out of it, which, I don't know, made it, I think, all the more impactful.
Definitely. And you go on during that TED Talk to talk about discovering that changing just one word in an email from stent to balloon completely transformed industry response. So what did this teach you about the importance of language and positioning in commercializing university innovations?
So I think ultimately, to lean into a bit more of my experience from TEDx, it really gave me a much better sense of the importance of understanding your audience. For me, it was about finding an application for a platform technology. That nano coding can be used in a variety of different uses. And I don't think anyone cared about that, right? They were looking at, their individual business case. And I think the difference between stent and balloon really focused on how product oriented these companies were. And how I think at the time I wasn't. I was more interested in, the science and how it's neat. I remember years and years ago, I was doing a startup pitch with a startup company in the ecosystem, and an investor looked at my pitch, and he very impassively sat and watched it. And at the end, he said, "You spent 4 out of 5 slides explaining how it works." I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "If you're telling me about it, I'm assuming it works." And I always remember that moment, right? Because yeah, you're right. Why would I be telling you? I just think it's such a culture clash. And I think what's so interesting about tech transfer, which is, given their own devices, most of my faculty, they just want to tell you how cool the journey was to figure out how the thing worked, because most things don't work, right? It's like, oh my God, it worked. Whereas you bring that to an investor or an industry audience, and they're not interested in that. They want to start from it works and thereafter. And, I think that moment, upon reflection and having thought a lot more about it in the past year than I ever did before, that was really kind of cultural and transitional in terms of how not only I viewed my job, but how I viewed kind of my relationship to the technical disciplines that I was trained in.
Now, another thing that I really noticed in your talk was that you were remarkably candid about experiencing anger and frustration in your tech transfer work. And that's not something that we hear professionals talk about all the time. In fact, it's something, I think the undercurrent is there, but people just don't openly talk about it. So why was that important for you to share some of that raw emotion?
I think that and again, to give credit back to TEDx Omaha, right? The emphasis there is, TEDx is ideas worth spreading. And so why is this idea worth spreading, right? What is the gift you want to give your audience? And I think rather than be kind of the science guy explaining the science behind things, which is what I really intended the talk to be to begin with, TEDx Omaha really focused on, but how did you feel and how can you convey that? And I was really surprised by the extent of my own anger, right? The original pitch for the talk when I applied to do TEDx was the same title. It was Innovation Needs Connection. And it was much like Innovation Overground. It was an attempt to really explain, why a good idea is not enough, right? And that was a much more sober and almost documentary kind of approach. And as I worked with the TEDx group, I really began to realize that, I was much angrier than I thought I was, because I'd never explored it. And I'm not an angry person by nature, I'm a much more depressed person by nature. But as I really kind of reflected on that story, I was, that was the way that I felt. And I think anyone in a sales role, and this was not the first sales job I ever had, can really relate to, that means of processing rejection. And there's a lot of ways in which you can do it, and all of them are valid. But I think in that moment, the anger was as much a surprise to me, I think, as it was, based on your response. And that was interesting. And in exploring that anger, it gave, I think, in my own experience of preparing the talk, a more authentic through line to a better place, rather than starting with it being depressed. Because I do think that a lot of the things I did at UNeTech in specific were really motivated by a very constructive form of that anger, not the kind of burning rage, but much more the smoldering, I'll show you.
Yeah.
I'm going to put this nano construct on a stent and make it awesome, and that'll show you. And I think that's a good energy. That's a terrible idea, but it's a good energy.
Yeah, it certainly beats the alternative, right? Which is just being depressed about it. So there is something to be said for anger and frustration and motivation to some extent.
And there was plenty of depression there. We just glossed over it.
So. Yeah, I figured there probably was a little bit there too. So you also mentioned that 97% of patents never make a dime, which is true, and that 90% of tech startups fail, which is also very true. So given those really awful stats, how do you help inventors and entrepreneurs maintain hope and persistence in view of these just awful statistics?
So I've been doing tech transfer for 20 years, and I have a lot of very long-term relationships. And I think ultimately the way that I can bulwark myself, and I can only do it by example, is to use all of these sort of tech transfer adventures as value in their own right. So I think a good example of that is at UNeTech, we are funded by a lot of economic development administration programs from the federal government. And originally we started out as like the innovation people at EDA. We're going to do cool tech stuff. I remember I went to a conference once and just handed everyone a 3D printed prototype that we just randomly produced in the project, and they thought that was really neat. But I quickly realized that it's not enduring, right? Like that's a cool story, right? But like those impacts were, they were intense and they were, in the moment. But we could do better. We could be just as innovative and produce something a bit more long lasting. And so we really reframed the program in terms of economic development and workforce development. And that was focused much more on training. We, in addition to being the innovation people, were the one where the university worked with the community college, which I guess is not all that common. And we have a great collaboration with Metro Community College. In fact, most of the 3D printed stuff I handed out was printed at the Center for Advanced and Emerging Technology at the Metro Community College campus, which is like 4 miles that way. And we really emphasized training people and getting certifications. And that was a real transformative moment. And so I think for me, setting yourself up for some type of outcome that's positive in the tech transfer experience is really important. One of the things I learned at Unimed is the importance of making industry connections and networking. And so the best way to make a good impression on a company you may want to work with in the future is to give them a straightforward pitch that they can say yes or no to, because they say yes or they say no, but they can tell whether they want to work with you or not. And I think that that is a way in which everything we did added value, even when it didn't bring about the end we wanted to. I think that letting go of the outcomes. And going back to your original question about the stent or the balloon, right? It also kind of relieves some agency from me in a way. Like, I could write the best email I can, but it doesn't say the magic word I didn't know I needed to say. So like, how can I blame myself, right? Whereas, the story could easily be about how I'd already made a friend in the industry who could pull me aside and be like, hey kid, you're using the wrong word here, right? How could I not be grateful for that? And I think like fundamentally, you have to be a bit more inclusive in your definition of what success is, and you have to be a bit more open to the ludicrous opportunities that such a cross-discipline collaborative environment can produce.
Absolutely. I think that's a really great way of looking at it. And, I want to turn to one more metaphor that you gave during your TEDx talk, which was really powerful because you referred to innovations as candles unlit in the face of the darkest night. So with challenges that we're facing like climate change and future pandemics, how do you maintain urgency while avoiding burnout?
I'm probably not a good person to talk to about avoiding burnout. I've had, periods of just crashes, and I work too hard, and I acknowledge that, and I'm struggling with it, and trying to make sense of it. I see a lot of my mentors who are at the ends of their careers, and they're terrified to stop, I think, because like, what are they going to do, right? And I know at some point, my professional identity is not going to be all that I am. And that I think really is something as I kind of hit the middle of middle age, right? I'm really being a lot more intentional about it. I think TEDx and social media is kind of an effort for me to build out from my professional identity into something that is more personable. And I really struggled with TEDx to talk about what I do for a living, but not to do it on behalf of the place I've worked for 20 years. Like, who am I and what do I even say, right? And so I think that whole notion of avoiding burnout, the only thing I can really say is knowing why I do things. I've never viewed myself as so much a mission of the university where I work, but for the broader things for which it stands. I was taught at a Jesuit institution, and I joke that it always ruined me because, I look at these big abstractions, and in many ways I relate better to them than I do some of the people in my life. And I think that was kind of the first part of it. I think the second part of it is, my kids are teenagers now, and they have their own opinions. And I was really surprised. My oldest son was incredibly cynical about my talk, and in a way that I think is very informed. Yeah, he's like, "What are you talking about? Solving problems? These problems are huge and indefensible and all that." And like, I mean, I gotta say, he's not wrong, right? I mean, in the scope of what he's looking at, I don't blame him for not being for being a bit cynical about it. I feel that way too, but I do think that the choice of those problems, right? Climate change and pandemic disease. I was an RNA biologist in grad school, and the whole miracle of the Warp Speed project and the mRNA vaccines is still something I struggle to process. That happened. It's mind blowing, and it's so interesting to me that in the end, adoption of that technology is not fundamentally a technical issue, but it's ultimately a political
issue. Yeah.
Boom, right? I mean, that's like crazy.
Who would have ever thought? Issue. Yeah.
Right. Like, I mean, it's a story no one would believe, right? It's like, oh, come on, you can't expect people to swallow this. And I don't mean to do anything to quash the legitimacy of that, right? That's for another conversation. I think it's much more realistic and practical. And so, I'm really interested at this technological moment we're in, where you're seeing the confluence of a lot of like world-changing technologies. We're going to see, in my kids' lifetime, they will see fusion power and like room temperature semiconducting and things made out of graphene. They're going to see quantum computing, which is going to fundamentally change the nature of the way things work. And then the harbinger of it all, artificial intelligence. And it's so interesting to see my kid's relationship to artificial intelligence. My youngest son, who's very creative and artistic, he wanted to talk to me about not about what he wrote. He wanted to talk to me about the AI's opinions about something he wrote, which I thought was so fascinating, isn't it?
Really interesting.
The AI thought my work was allegorical. What do you think? And I'm just like, couldn't you just start with what do you think? But no, that's cool. That's cool. And
that's wild.
And we ended up talking about it for a very long time. And I was very grateful for it, right? It's like, talk about a use case of AI that's unambiguously good to me. And so I think like, the notion that these are candles unlit in the face of darkest night, I think it's meant to impose that sense of urgency, right? That like, there is a lot of things we could do and we're not. And if for political reasons or economic reasons or whatever. But in the end, the dark is dark and we know how to light it and we're not. And I think that really poses some very fundamental and interesting questions to our economies and our politics and our choices.
Absolutely. Listening to you talk about, the conversations with your sons after you gave this TED Talk, it makes me want to ask you, it seems like this TEDx talk caused you to do a lot of self-reflection. So what even prompted you to even apply to do this talk to begin with?
I don't really remember. I remember filling out the application one night at a pizzeria.
Seriously? You were out at a pizzeria? That's hilarious.
Yeah, I was out at a pizzeria, Zio's Pizza, Omaha, Nebraska, the best pizza in the world. I'll fight anyone who says otherwise. And I filled out the application and I didn't submit it because you had to shoot a video. And I had this idea to shoot, because they really wanted people who had connections to Omaha. Like that was a big deal in the application. And so we shot this guerrilla video at all these different Omaha sites. I shot it with my kids. They filmed me walking backwards on my iPhone. If you ever see it, which I hope you don't, I look really tall because they were still, short in those days. And it was really fun. Like we shot at the Omaha Zoo. We shot at the downtown park. We shot it a couple spots at UNMC and at UNO. And it really was a lot of fun because I was thinking of the old Red Hot Chili Pepper song Under the Bridge, which is Anthony Kiedis' love letter to Los Angeles. And it was really my love letter to Omaha, which is a city that I've lived in most of my life. And most people don't know Omaha and I don't blame them, but it's great. You should come here. And I think like that's kind of when I realized that this is clearly about something more than a TEDx talk, that, this is kind of a gateway. And I think what it really came down to was that sense of identity. I think that I had put so much effort into tech transfer and then into whatever UNeTech is, which is, I guess, tech transfer adjacent. And I think that there was this like deep well of emotional need within me to kind of understand my professional existence independently of that. And that was a very welcome exercise. I could not have asked for a better set of partners than with TEDx Omaha. They were so generous and their process, which was not what I would have chosen at all, but was perfect. And they gave me space to trust a process, which is very unusual for me. And I think on the other side, it's really led to me having a much greater sense of curiosity about what I think and what matters to me and where that is consistent with and not consistent with my employer. I think in the current political environment where, there is such an emphasis on what messages come from which public institutions, it's been a godsend to know who I am in this professional role as a leader, as an employee, as a scientist, as a lawyer, and who I am when I'm not any of those things. And I'm still figuring it out, but thank God I asked the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that you mentioned during your talk is that big ideas have to die 3 deaths, at least if they're ever going to change the world. So I thought that was a really interesting statement. So how do you help entrepreneurs and inventors distinguish between productive failure and destructive failure?
So that's a quote from a book called Moonshots, which talks about how every good idea dies at least 3 deaths. And I think that one of the issues that you can kind of come with in like corporate thinking is stack ranking. So here's 100 ideas. And when something fails, we know it's a bad idea. And that's a very rational way to view the world. But it's not how a lot of the really important products of our lives really came to be, right? I mean, I think for me, having a much more nuanced notion of success and failure is what really matters. And I think like going back to like the stents and balloons thing, right? Like if I'd have just stuck with the stent email, I would have drawn the wrong conclusion. Industry is not interested in nano formulations, when in fact they're just not interested in stents. And so I think that what I kind of learned from that is to be very vigilant about my own projections into what results necessarily mean. If you're sitting there with, 100 things and you only invest in 2, you have a real emotional sense that I really want to cross things off the list, right? And like that's very human, very understandable, and I'm not critical at all about that. But I do think it leads to a bias where you will kind of almost like reverse confirmation bias, right? It's elimination bias, and I think that that's what I took from that book, Loonshots. And I think ultimately it's what really mattered to me in terms of running the UNeTech Institute. I think we did a mission, vision, value session, which, if you know me, is something I don't ever savor, but it ended up being a really transformative moment. I give a lot of credit to my colleague, Jenny Poole. She's the one who directed it. And she came up with, or I guess as a group, we came up with this idea of excellence as one of our values, but it's excellence through failure. And the idea is that you have to invest in the failures to understand what excellence is. That's earned excellence, as opposed to projected excellence or decreed excellence, right? The actual excellence is the thing you have the painful lessons to learn. And I think that, that's just further proof that the Jesuits were in my mind.
Well, I don't know about that, but given your career in tech transfer, what are some of the most valuable lessons you've learned from projects that didn't make it to market?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question. I think that I've gained a lot of comfort from the poem If by Rudyard Kipling, right? And I think that he has the line, oh God, can't do it on the spot. If you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two imposters just the same, right? I think that, it's made me learn to not hold on to my successes too much because it's not really about me. Sometimes you just got lucky, sometimes you're in the right place at the right time. And that makes holding on to the failures letting go of the failures a lot easier. So I think that's kind of the first part, is that, you can't think you're too clever when you win, and then, you don't have to beat yourself up too bad when you lose. I think the second part is how much of a privilege I've had to learn. I mean, I know a lot of things, and I'm really lucky in that sense. I could talk about nonlinear analysis of waveforms. I can, talk about immunobiology. Oh my God, I had a whole season of that. Mechatronics and robotics. I mean, I'm a botanist, man. I studied photosynthetic algae, and, I'm so far away from that. I think I was very fortunate to kind of see the end of the 20th century university and the emergence of the 21st century university. And it's a rare privilege, I think, to watch as these institutions, which are old and creaky and medieval, but incredibly durable, adapt to a new world. And so I've really enjoyed that. I know a lot of different kinds of people. That's been so much joy, I guess. Students and lawyers and investors. I can unironically look to a colleague and go, oh boy, another one of these seed investors, and they know what I mean, and that's crazy to me, right? I think that I've had opportunities afforded to me by the institution to lead and to follow and to have people ask my opinion. And, that's been a real privilege as well. There are collaborators on staff and on faculty that, ask my opinion and want to know what it means. And that's not anything I should take for granted, but sometimes it's really hard to remember. And I appreciate the question.
Well, it's been an amazing career. And, I do want to ask a little bit about UNeTech here and share with us maybe some of your current success stories and what innovations are coming out of it now that you're really excited about.
Well, thank you. I love a chance to crow about what we're doing here at UNeTech. So UNeTech focuses on startups, and we have a real emphasis on non-faculty founded startups. We do provide support for faculty startups. But a UNeTech portfolio project usually has an external entrepreneur that's running the project. We're just about to come into Startup Week, or Startup Omaha Week 2025. That is going to be located at UNMC's new innovation center called the Catalyst. We're going to be doing a project that we've dreamed of doing for years. We're calling it the Midway of Innovation. Step right up and see the future. And it's going to be a bit of a World's Fair. And there's going to be 2 featured UNeTech projects and a couple of UNeTech startups that will have booths there. One of the booths will be a company called Respira AI. Respira AI was one of the few things I saw in my tech transfer portfolio days that I think really could be a world-changing company. It is a biomechanics-based solution for chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder. It's the 4th leading cause of death in the world with no cure and no effective means of tracking progression. Biomechanics at UNO is one of the most world-renowned programs in the world related to the study of human motion. And we launched a startup that is based both in Tel Aviv and in Omaha that is currently raising their Series A. And they have an ongoing clinical study showing that this wearable device is able to track the progression of chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder. Research that was actually sponsored by my institute years and years ago suggested it may even be able to predict the onset of COPD exacerbations, although the company would never claim that. It's something that has been published. And it has the potential to really revolutionize the way people live with this disease. And so that's always a really important thing for me personally. I think the project really shows what a local startup means in the 21st century. It's something that is both here and global and doing big things and doing small things. The second startup company we have is also out of UNO Biomechanics. It's a company called IMPOWER Health. IMPOWER is the world's best self-pacing treadmill. So this is a treadmill that is essentially instrumented with low-cost instruments. It's only a couple of cameras and a microprocessor. And it essentially can now track the pace that you're going in real time. And so this treadmill will actually be operating at the UNMC Catalyst building. The general public who's actually going to a conference in town, they'll be able to come over and run on it, and we'll be collecting data, which will be really cool. But that project was very personal for me. We recruited the founder of the company, who was a former technology lead at a treadmill company, to be able to run the project. And it's been in collaboration with UNO Biomechanics as well.
Smart treadmill.
Yeah, and he's really positioned it as much more than kind of a party trick, which is what the sort of self-pacing can kind of feel like. It's essentially the world's first low-cost gait analysis platform, because all the things that it does to adjust to your pace is enough to be able to get meaningful gait analysis.
Really, really cool. Well, excited about that. And I'm kind of curious too, we were talking before the podcast started, in addition to all your responsibilities with UNeTech, you recently joined Gearhart Law as a patent attorney. And I'm tired just even thinking about it, to be very honest. So talk to us what that's been like for you and how your tech transfer background influences the work you do at the firm.
Yeah, no, it's a really exciting time. A couple of years ago, as I sort of transitioned out from doing tech transfer full time, I really wanted to find some opportunities to keep my IP skills up. And so I've been working as a contract lawyer for a variety of different firms. The first formal arrangement I've had is with Gearhart, and that was at the start of the summer. I was really excited. It was nice to find a firm that, for me, was a very natural fit. A lot of their work is very custom. They really focus on client services and understanding the technology. which I think is a real bonus. I love working with David and with Richard. They do a good job of understanding where their clients are at and building something that's custom for them, rather than just kind of the way they do it, which is fine too. I think that there's all kinds of ways to provide great IP services. Theirs is just one that is really natural to me. And I think it's been really great for me to learn from them. You know, the thing about IP, because it's dealing with anything that people can invent, there's always something to learn. And that's been a real privilege in sort of having this as my profession. And, Gearhart has a real emphasis, not just on technology, but on entrepreneurship. And I think that that's really kind of the natural fit for me, really understanding, not only how do we claim this, but how is it relevant to the business case of the client. I think that's really important for their practice. And it's been a real natural fit for me.
Well, I'm glad you found a place that is that natural fit and that you're enjoying it and keeping up with your IP skills. That's great. That it sounds like it's been a win-win for both of you.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed my time there so far, and I'm looking forward for more.
Excellent. Well, Joe, you describe your career journey as moving from anger to frustration to purpose to inspiration to agency, and then finally to gratitude, which you've mentioned a couple times. What advice would you give to others navigating their own emotional journey in tech transfer?
I think the first thing is to accept it. It's very easy to be professional and indomitable. That I've kind of found it's just more useful to be vulnerable. In my interactions with faculty, who can be difficult sometimes, simply acknowledging how you feel in a space is sometimes the most powerful thing that you can do. And it's an easy way to change the tenor of a conversation. Simply to say ouch when people hurt you. It's really scary, but it's something that I really committed to do mostly for my own mental health. And I think that it's a great place to start from. I think also, acknowledging your own kind of emotional basis, in a negotiation or in a discussion, it's not always negative emotions. It's genuinely being excited. I think one of the things that is kind of the first casualty in a tech transfer career is that sort of excitement that comes with projects because, it's another one of these things and I know exactly how it's going to fail. And that's a very legitimate way to go. But I think when you can't cultivate a general sense of excitement from a new invention from a world expert, that's a problem. And it's certainly a solvable problem, right? It's certainly something that you can spend time to figure out how to get back. And I've seen a lot of people do it, but I do think that it's a good canary in the coal mine to kind of understand, what is the emphasis there. I think the second part is find a way to make it your own. I was fortunate to have a lot of autonomy in how I did tech transfer. And that really led to a real emphasis on entrepreneurship in my career. And I'm really grateful for that. And I give a lot of credit to my colleagues at Unimed, for giving me space to figure that out. And that was something that was very meaningful to me. The objects for tech transfer are very general, and there's a lot of ways to get there. And I'd really encourage everyone to find their own path that's relevant to kind of what you do and to sort of identify that. And I guess like the last thing would just be, take some time to reflect on it. I think there's a lot of people who generally stay in positions too long because they aren't reflective on it. And there's a lot of really great paths, that lead through tech transfers and do other things. One of the unexpected joys of working here for such a long time is I have a lot of colleagues who are doing tech transfer somewhere else, or they're in totally different fields. And, they've all had their own paths, but we all kind of had that one moment where we're all together.
So, Joe, as the podcast comes to a close, I wanted to ask you, looking ahead, what keeps you most inspired about the future of innovation in tech transfer?
I think that the economy feels very different now than when I started. I think that it's changed, but I also think it's just a real difference of perspective. I have really seen, especially when it comes to investors and startups, just how important like those individual networks really are and the amount of power that people have. And so I think like the first thing that keeps me inspired is those connections that I've made that were really motivated by kind of the wonder of what we do. People who invest in things, not because of the market, not because of the opportunity, although those were there, but of the things that met their criteria, this is the one that they just thought was cool. And I think that, that's really important. And that sort of human element, as infuriating as it could be, also makes it interesting. So I think that's kind of the first thing. I think the second part is, kind of one of the things I'm constantly reiterating to my son is just how much the world is going to change in the next couple of years. And that can either be really scary or it can be really compelling. And I think both are true. And a lot of that just comes down to the attitude that you kind of take with it. And I think that's really important to me. And I guess the last one is, I've gotten to an age where I can reflect a bit more on the things that I've done and see some of the consequences from it. And that's been really nice. It's people who have gotten jobs that, trained here, or it's people who have moved on to other positions. It's startup companies that have launched. I think that there's something really almost relieving to see a couple of these, projects really start to move and sort of identify. And that's been a great solace to me, especially as age makes it uncomfortable to sit down and hard to get up in the morning.
Oh, that is too funny. Well, thank you, Joe. Congratulations on your TEDx talk. It really was fantastic. And I hope our listeners will tune in and listen. It's really, I think it's 10 minutes. It was pretty short. I encourage everybody to listen to it. And thank you so much for being back on the podcast and spending some time with us.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It's such a pleasure. Have a good day.
Joe, this has been absolutely fascinating. Your TEDx talk and the insights you shared today really highlight something crucial that we don't always talk about in tech transfer, the deeply human side of innovation. The idea that innovation needs not just the right technical solutions, but the right community of people with diverse perspectives to nurture those solutions into reality is profound. For our listeners who want to learn more about Joe's work, you can check out his TEDx talk, Innovation Needs Connection, or follow his insights on LinkedIn. And of course, you can learn more about the groundbreaking work happening at the UNeTech Institute. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Autumn on the Air. Until next time, keep those innovations moving from the bench to the market.
Thanks for listening to Autumn on the Air with Lisa Mueller. Get social with us and share your thoughts. You can tweet us at AUTM or visit us online at autm.net. We'll be back next week on the air. Be sure to join us.